And we'll try be better clappers now. Okay. 3, 2, 1, clap. Oh, that was better. That was better. It wasn't great, but it was better.
Yeah. It sounded about a second out on my hand, but
yeah, same. Just about half a second. So yeah, that was better. That was better. Okay, I'm going to introduce us now. What is going on, my game design gurus? Welcome to the Level Design Lobby. Hey everyone, thank you for joining me, your host, Max Pears, to the Level Design Lobby. This is the 15th episode, so it's not a milestone, but still cool to be on this episode. And this is a very special one because I've got a very special guest, the man, the myth, the legend, Stuart Scott, acting level design lead at Reflections, a Ubisoft studio.
Hi Max, how are you doing?
I'm alright, mate, I'm alright. What about you?
I'm good, especially after that intro.
Yeah, did you feel the pressure on your shoulders there?
Yeah, suddenly the weight of the world is kind of weighing down on me now after that introduction. But I'll be good. I shall be alright.
You're like a mythical unicorn, Stu. Don't play yourself down.
No, I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm happy to have you here, mate. So, as I just said, Stu is an acting lead, level designer, and you've been doing, level design for how long now, mate?
8 years this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Flown
by. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. Oh, it has. It's been a fun and long road, but it has flown by.
All right. Well, do you want to tell my listeners about yourself? Give a bit of an introduction.
Sure, that'd be good. So I kind of started in the modding and custom mapping scene. I mean, if I trace it right back, I started making Doom levels before I was 10. So I guess back then I knew somehow I wanted to be a level designer. But yeah, I was working on creating custom maps for things like Counter-Strike and Unreal Tournament and Call of Duty back in the day, and eventually got my position as a mission scripter at Reflections, working on Driver San Francisco.
Oh, nice.
That was a great experience, and worked on a lot of the driving missions for that game. It was a kind of different form of level design to what I was traditionally used to, but yeah, it was a great experience. And then after that, moved on to Watch Dogs, which was a hell of a game. It was working on driving content for that game as well. It was a little bit different to what I'd become used to on Driver, but that was a great learning experience. And then after that, moved on to The Division and back to what I considered a bit more of a traditional level design, as I worked in the open world team, working on lots of different areas for that recreation of Manhattan that we did for The Division. And then the Underground DLC that I think we'll probably talk a little bit about later.
Yeah, man, and The Division is where mine and Stu's fates intertwined, if you will. And that's where we met, and that was we worked together, like you said, on The Division and Underground. So that's how our love affair started. I shouldn't say that too loud with your fiance in the house, but so yeah, that's a Stu. He's a man of great talent, and I was happy to work with him for 2.5 years. I think we worked together, and it's great to have him on the show. So we're going to be talking. Today's topic really is going to be about procedural level design, and chatting really about the difference with that and the normal kind of method that we generally use, which is more of a handcrafted kind of design approach that many games take to making it. Just because I think personally it's good to know about the different ways that levels are made. It's not all the same. Every company and every game has their own different approach and kind of ethos when it comes to making levels and to making games. So that's going to be the main topic of today. But before we get into that, we'll just really talk about the the current method that most places do, which is more handcrafted stuff. And do you want to take it away from there, Stu? I'm just dropping you in the deep end.
Bloosh. It was just like that. Yeah. So, as you describe it, like that handcrafted approach, it's typically it's a very high, sort of hands-on, obviously, but it's very detail oriented, and it allows for very selective iteration and fine tuning throughout production. We often start with very kind of abstract paper designs, and then start to block out the broad shapes and form of the level, and then start to like kind of sculpt that down into the final refined level experience. Typical examples would be like your linear story-based experiences, such as your Uncharted, or you can have different experiences as well in multiplayer as well. That's a very kind of different handcrafted multiplayer experience, where every little corner and sight line has to be very finely tuned to ensure you've got a very balanced experience in a multiplayer scenario. And then open world is a very different beast again, that you're often working on a much broader scale, trying to accommodate for less linear gameplay experiences, but it often goes through the same sort of process of you start with like an abstract high level, and then start to refine that down into a very low level design, and constantly iterate and fine tune until it's ready to unleash on players.
Your choice of word with unleash, you couldn't have picked a better word for it. But no, I completely agree with Stu. It's more about when you're making in this traditional sense, you kind of understand what's going to happen second by second, minute by minute, the emotion, the direction, how players are going to enter, how they're going to leave, and the gameplay beats throughout each encounter as well. So it's a lot more of an understanding with this kind of this method, which is used basically, as Stu just said, all types of level design, whether it be multiplayer, open world, or linear. And like I said, what we're chatting about is procedural level design. And some of you may be thinking, well, what is procedural level design? And as me and Stu had a chat off air, it's quite a hard one to nail down, really, because again, there's many different methods. But to give a kind of a basic summary from my point of view before Stu says what his is, to me, it's procedural level design is more of where a system creates the level, and it's about us as designers or artists or programmers. We set up certain parameters which the level is created under, and once these parameters are set, then the level is constructed through these parameters. And it's more about you as a designer building or setting up these parameters for a smaller chunk rather than a big full mission. That's like the simplified version, in my opinion, of what procedure generated is. What's your definition, Steve? Because I was scared you were silent because I'd messed that up.
Yeah, I was just silently judging you across the airwaves there. No, I think you hit upon it there with, in a typical sense, procedural level design, it's often, applied to tile-based games or different kind of games where we can break the level up into smaller chunks. And the procedural aspect comes from how we design a system that will reconstruct those chunks into one kind of whole playable experience or level. That's why for me, I think of procedural level design as just that. It's like a procedure. It's a sequential process that we use to create something. It's like tool-assisted level design is a way of thinking about it, I think. And you mentioned we can focus on smaller chunks or sections of a level and still have that very handcrafted approach to designing those individual spaces, thinking holistically about what the end result will be and how those smaller chunks will feed into that. But we can often also design how the system will interpret those chunks and how it will piece those chunks together to produce something that creates a holistic level according to what our ambitions for it are, or tailored to a type of experience that we want to give players.
Yeah, man. And we have both worked on many games, and we've both worked on procedural games, which was what the Division Underground was. That was procedural dungeons, and we've both worked on more handcrafted experiences, which is what the Division was. And I think one of my questions for you, mate, is what do you find the differences are between creating a procedural level and versus a handcrafted level? Like, what are the biggest differences to you?
I think the biggest difference is where the designer is focused. So, in handcrafted, like I said, you're very focused on, you start off on the high level and you start to focus down and down until you're focused on tweaking this one piece of cover, to make sure that the level's balanced, or tweaking an opening in the space to help players recognize where the exit of the room is, or where enemies are going to enter from. And in procedural, you can still do that, but you often have to do it at that higher level, where you are removed from that fine tuning experience. Or you might find that rather than fine tuning all of the individual asset placement in the scene, you're actually fine tuning the parameters that are going to control where those assets appear or not in the scene. And it's kind of that difference of where the designer is actually trying to interpret what they have in their head through the tools or through the system. You mentioned before as well, often with procedural, it's working with parameters, and tuning parameters is a very different approach to tuning the environment, or moving props around in a scene to balance your level design. But it's, in many ways, it is kind of resulting with the same. It's two means to the same ends.
Oh, for sure. I believe, it's just another method, as you're saying. Like, it's a different way to achieving that. And I've got to say, the biggest differences for me really are, I've got a few of them. You're like we said earlier, you're building more of a smaller section, so that's different to, say, building the whole thing, because when you start, hold on a sec. Sorry, I'm getting buzzed right now, and I need to mute these people. Sorry, we're back now with it. Sorry, as I was saying, when you're handcrafting it, you kind of know beginning to end roughly what's going to happen. While when you're making a more procedural, if it comes to you doing more of these smaller sections or tiles, you've kind of got to design a bit more multi-purpose compared to linear objectives. I think that's one of the biggest differences.
I guess that comes down to what you're actually trying to get out of the final level. It's definitely possible to have a procedural level created with tiles that still gives you that very specific experience beat by beat. It's just a matter of, again, where you're having the designer focus on crafting the experience, but also questioning how much you want to bring in randomized elements or not. Do you want to have those randomized location of enemies or something to give you more variance in your level, or do you want to always have them spawn in the same place, and it's more a case of you're encountering these enemies at a certain point in the overall experience of the level, if you know what I mean. And
I agree and disagree with you there. I mean, like you said, it's down to the game. It's not just procedural generation works all the same as you're saying. It's down to the overall design of the game. But one of the benefits of it being procedural is that these tiles or sections that you make, that it allows multi-purpose because it can change the experience for players. Like this section I've made, okay, it's made for a certain, for example, combat, but it can also do another type of combat, like close range to long range, for example. And that's, again, dependent on the parameter of this mission or this playthrough, that you choose which type of range combat you want. But that tile, like most of these games that do procedural, has to support a number of these combats in my opinion. So that's what I mean with it.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Again, I think it just comes down to how much control you want to put into the hands of the designer who is kind of prodding the system, or how much you expose those parameters to the designer. You expose enough, and you can still have that very authored experience within a procedural level. But you're right as well. Like, typically, and from my experience, if you're creating these chunks, you want to make sure that they support multiple types of gameplay or scenarios, so that they're more versatile in the system. But at the same time, you can create very specific, chunks that will always give you the same type of experience, and build that into the system as well to give you those very authored experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer with either of what we've said there. It's like you're saying, it's coming down to the experience of what the designers are trying to create with their system from it. And from that, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is what do you believe are the advantages of procedural, and what do you believe are the advantages of handcraft? Do you want to go first? I've got some notes, but if you've got some notes, do you want to step up to the plate first, Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of advantages in terms of how it can help. Well, off the bat, straight away, smaller teams. It's an ideal tool and process for indies, and just because of the very nature of how it allows, it allows you to increase the output of the levels that you're creating. You create a small handful of these tiles, a couple of different kind of recipes for the system to interpret how it's going to piece together these tiles, and then it can ultimately spit out as many levels as you require for your game. That's certainly an appealing aspect for many smaller teams, and that can really feed into specific genres of games as well. Games that are meant to be replayable or run based, like roguelikes. You often find that they have a lot of procedural level generation in there.
Yeah, man. No, I agree. I mean, mine are very similar. You can get a lot more levels for the time and money of your team. Spaces can be reused for different objectives, like we said earlier from it. I think this is one of the biggest advantages that procedural has, is like players can generally have their own experience in their levels compared to handcrafted. You might see something different compared to what I saw before, and so on and so forth. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And from a design process, like, it challenges you in a different way, and it's great for a learning experience. If you are a level designer and haven't had a chance, I mean, I don't know if you get a chance, it's not always up to you to decide, but if you do get a chance to work on something that's procedural, do try it, because it does change your mindset on how you design certain things. I know it definitely changed my approach to level design after working on Underground, that's for sure. So those are my advantages of procedural. What are your advantages of handcraft, mate? Handcraft design.
I was just going to say I've got a few more actually on.
I'm trying to stop you. Still, no, carry on with it.
You'll never stop me.
Yeah, show me up.
yeah, I mean, it's a really great tool for other specific games as well, I guess, in terms of if discovery or exploration are part of the core loop of a game, procedural content can generate ever-changing experiences. So it's great for things like Civilization or 4X games, or even games like Spelunky we were talking about before, where the focus is definitely on mastery of the mechanics and abilities instead of the levels, and having a constant regeneration of the levels forces you to become more adept at how you play the game, as opposed to learning the levels and using that memory to overcome the obstacles in there. I mean, it's as we move to more games as a service model, I think it's going to be really useful in the future as well for teams that need to release kind of frequent content updates. Again, it kind of speaks to how it's useful for indies. It can be useful for AAA as well, who are trying to move to this games as a service model. It can help you hide a lot of the seams as well. You couple procedural level design with the abstract realization or art style, and it can actually hide a lot of the seams and actually become part of the world itself. Again, this is something that roguelikes tend to do, and when I say the seams, I'm talking typically about that tile-based generation where you've got these two tiles connected together by the system. That it's good for games that rely on that. Something that I don't think we've actually seen much use of at the moment, but games that wanted to provide UGC, user-generated content, that is, it could be really useful for them to expose a lot of the same parameters and kind of interfaces that designers might be using to generate these procedural levels, to expose that to players and give them the same tools to produce their own levels.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. That one, I like that.
But yeah, the final point is, I think, something that you did touch upon, and again, I don't think we see enough of it right now. And for me, it's where I would like to see the future of procedural level design go, and that's to generate levels or experiences specifically tailored to each individual player. And particularly if we can kind of take the player's actions in the game or in the world or the level that is generated and feed that back into their experience for future levels, or even just the next level or the next 30 seconds of the game, have it reacting and adapting to the way the player plays the game, and give them an experience or a level procedurally based on those actions.
That'd be a very interesting one. I like that concept. You've now just made someone a rich person, Stu.
Yeah. TM. Delete.
Delete the whole podcast. Yes. Never mind. Yeah, man, I agree. I think it's got an interesting future moving forward, I think, with it. What you're saying about user-generated content, I think that's a fair point as well. I think that's not something I've thought about. And I do believe it's going to be a good tool for indies moving forward. And it'd be interesting what other genres take procedural level design as well. Because as you said, it's more kind of roguelikes and sort of Civilization style games than it is survivals as well. Than like a big story game right now. So it'll be interesting to see what other genres, like, I know horror could do some amazing things with it. And like to see some ideas come from different genres. I think that'll definitely push this as a system forward as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that you've shown me up with more points that you had than me, we're going to move on to what do you believe are the advantages of Handcrafted then?
So yeah, I kind of took this as the opposite way around of what are the disadvantages of procedural almost, but yeah, it's some of the stuff we've already talked about. It's you have more advantage in how you tune and iterate the experience when it's more handcrafted. You have more authorial control overall, and it can be quite scary as designers to kind of relinquish a little bit of that control and put it in the hands of this system, and particularly if the interface or the parameters that you're using to now control the design of this experience, if it's not entirely clear, that just makes that whole barrier even more scary to like, I'm not gonna, I can't let go of this particular moment. I need to finally craft it because it needs to be this exact thing that players experience. It's a really hard thing to give up, but I think it's slowly changing within the industry. But
I think that was one of the things, story time of when we were working on the Underground, the phrase used there, letting go. I think that was the big kind of mantra for our team when working on the Underground, because we as a team were definitely struggling with that idea, because we just come off the Division where we handcrafted everything, and we wanted each encounter to roughly play like these sort of ways. But with this, it was much harder, and I think that's one of the things that if you are working on the system, you have to like ingrain that into your head. It's okay to let go, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely helps when you're working on a game or an experience that allows you to embrace that mentality a little bit more as well. Like, as you said, we transitioned from very handcrafted, authored experiences throughout the game to then doing something completely different in a very short space of time, and it's obviously not going to be everyone going to snap their fingers and instantly be like, oh yeah, this is completely different to the way I was working before, but that's good, and be on board with that. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and I think a lot of designers still harbor that fear, particularly designers who are used to that. Even in my background from modding, you have very particular control over every aspect of the level, particularly when you come from a modern background where often you are the only person doing all of the animations and the art and the VFX, and when you start handing that off to other people or other systems, that's a different thing to try and come to terms with.
For sure, man, for sure. Sorry, I kind of diverted your advantages of handcraft. Sorry, sir. Please continue with that one.
I mean, well, the other thing, and we can all probably point to some examples of this, is with procedural, there's often a perception that it's broadly repetitive, and it lacks kind of depth or variance in the levels themselves. You often see the same, often described as like running down the corridor in Scooby-Doo, where you pass the same table and then the grandfather clock, and then the doorway, and then the table, and the grandfather clock, and procedural gets that kind of bad stick as well. And yeah, I acknowledge it's a real concern, and you do have to put a lot of effort into kind of combating that, and obviously with a handcrafted approach, that's a much easier thing to avoid, for sure.
Yeah, man, I think it's tough, but then when you think about it, there was a crazy statistic that came with the first Red Dead Redemption, because I believe that, I mean, I don't know, but I'm just imagining that game was mainly handcrafted because it was an open world. I could be wrong, but I believe it was mainly handcrafted. I think they said, 30 to 40% of people actually completed that game. And so when you think how many people bought that game, how many areas never got seen by the players, and I think it's such an interesting challenge with this, because yes, you want to give as much as you can, but also you've got to remember that some of these areas that you spent ages crafting may never get seen by the player or all the players. And I think that's it's more from a production standpoint, I guess, than from a level design one. But it's just an interesting fact, that one, to me. I found that very, like, you know, crazy and scary in many ways.
Yeah, you could take the same type of apply that to a poet who spends a year locked away and comes up with a small poem and release it into the world, and it turns out that only 3 people read it, and that's a year of their life that they're never getting back. But that's just one of the risks of being in a creative industry, I guess. It's it's having that kind of exposure to the work and the effort, and in many ways the art that you create. You put yourself out there with it. But
yeah, man. I mean, I am pretty much a poet, but thank you for confirming that, Stu. I'm going to put that in my Twitter description. Stuart Scott says I'm a poet. That one. I got some advantages on Handcrafted that I personally enjoy compared to sometimes working on Procedural. Is you can always test it. It's a lot easier to test things and to get feedback. Testing with Procedural sometimes can take forever to do it, and you might not get the same experience as the person who saw the bug. So this can add a bit more time into testing and fixing. I think with it, it's a lot easier to balance with. I mean, it comes back to the parameters and stuff, but I generally find it's easier to balance than a Procedural thing, because again, it's letting go. You don't always know how this is going to turn out sometimes, and because you don't have the big picture if you're working on a certain tile, and you just got a lot more control, obviously, from it. I think that's a big thing. Is again, it comes down to, do you want to let go? But with Handcraft, you get to control everything, and you understand what's happening by communicating with your team members. At this certain point, this is going to happen. This is the overall pacing. Is there too much action here? Is there not enough action there? And you can adjust on the fly because of that, compared to sometimes Procedural from it. And the biggest advantage for Handcraft over Procedural to me is when someone changes something in Procedural, it can be like a domino effect. It can just throw a lot of things out of whack. And compared to Handcrafted, when you kind of know what's going on, it doesn't always throw everything out of whack, which is one of my things on what I prefer when it comes to Handcrafted or Procedural. But that's just more because I've got bad stories with that happening. So I drew the short straw on life with Procedural on that experience. But yeah, I think they both have advantages and disadvantages. And this episode is not to discuss which is better. This is us just discussing about the different methods there are out there. So yeah.
I definitely think you're right as well that Procedural can be a lot harder to debug and test. And yeah, often, because it's such a almost systems-led approach to design, small changes in one part of the system can have a huge knock-on effect on the rest of the the generation. But it's these issues as well are issues that we have every day in games development in particular.
Yeah.
It's particularly in AAA, it's a huge moving beast of a machine that one little cog goes wrong and it can have huge ramifications as well. And through the lens of Procedural, those little cogs become even bigger issues. It's
just more glaring with Procedural, I find.
Yeah,
I don't think you're wrong.
And it definitely in some ways that can slow down iteration as well. If particularly if you're reliant on a new system or authoring tools to actually produce your Procedural content, it delays the moment when you can actually produce something fully playable and have that pad in hand experience of what the player's going to experience. And it produces a lot more uncertainty sometimes when that's the case. Or it can introduce a lot more risk in certain developments if you're not careful. But that's why I think it comes down to where the focus lies in having that high level or holistic focus as a designer on, if I tweak this one little value here, do I know what the impact will be at the other end when it produces a level? And,
probably not. Is always
probably
be
not.
The answer.
But that's part of the challenge, isn't it? That's part of the way that we rethink about. That's part of the difference in procedural and handcrafted, I think. And it's a different frame of mind and being aware of those issues and learning from your mistakes.
I think that's just game development as a whole. Try to learn from your mistakes.
Pretty much.
Yeah, no matter, slight off topic, but no matter what you make, especially as a dev, especially when you read people's comments, oh, this is wrong or this could have been better. Trust us, we know. We're mad and angry that we didn't get the time, or we weren't able to change it in time. So, yeah,
100%. But also, don't read the comments.
That just puts me in my dark place, dude.
Real quick, just when we're talking about like the differences as well, or rather, to go back to the advantages, just to flip this whole thing upside down,
Do it.
But there's definitely aspects of procedural generation that can benefit level design as well, if we don't just look at it as terms of generating the levels themselves. There's definite benefit to be had from producing or procedurally generating data within the levels or the environments that can be used for other systems that that go into producing the final product of a game, which things like hooks for animations or NPC behaviors in a scene, or audio propagation, and all these different things that so often actually end up being implemented by level designers in some teams, and it can be quite a labor intensive thing to manually add all of this stuff in the levels. And having smart solutions to that through the use of procedural generation can actually help take a lot of that heavy lifting off level design and give them more time to iterate and finally tune the levels themselves. And you will find, I think, that we have this on not just procedural or randomized generation games, but also on like the very handcrafted linear experiences as well, where they'll use some small elements of procedural to help support the level designers.
Yeah, man, I think that's it's just right. I just agree with that. Yeah, there's definitely ways that we can take these sort of systems and apply them to other areas to help the overall process of creating a game. And yeah, I think these tools will be come up with and be implemented by far smarter people than myself. But yeah, it'd be interesting again to see where this tech goes moving forward. I'm going to move on to our next topic, Stuart, which for you, the question is out of all the procedural games that you've seen so far, which are the ones that stand out to you the most then?
I've got a few that I probably won't come as too much of a surprise, but
he's going to say Division Underground, people. He's going to say it. Just watch.
I hate to be the disappointment to you, but no, there is a game that we have talked about already, actually, and it isn't the Division, but Spelunky, definitely a high watermark of procedural level design in particular, just because of although it's very simple in its form and how it actually procedurally generates its levels and blends it with kind of that randomized and authored approach, for me, I think it's probably one of the purest forms of procedural level design that we haven't seen, or I can't think of any other examples that are quite so embedded into the core game experience as Spelunky's level design, procedural level design is into that game. We talked about it before about how it really encourages the mastery of the mechanics and the abilities rather than the levels themselves, and that is so core to that, what makes that game so much fun.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely agree. It's definitely one of the high benchmarks, in my opinion, as well. I believe also Minecraft is to me. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe every time you go in and you play the survival mode, all the level is procedurally generated before you, and I think it's definitely one of the best ones for it because the amount of depth as well, because it's a 3D environment and you can go under the ground or above it and things. I think is to me it was a very, very good game, and it goes back to your point as well. It is more again focusing on the mastery of the mechanics of building shelter, finding a place to hide, and learning how to craft things, and just the level just encouraged and taught the players that as well.
Yeah, it's a good shout. Another one for me, I think, was Invisible Ink, which I don't know if you played it. This was a game from Clay in 2015.
No, I can't say I have.
And it's a great blend of like procedurally generated levels with stealth gameplay, which in my mind are two things that on paper should never work. Stealth gameplay requires the player to be aware of NPC pacing and enemy patrols, and to procedurally generate those experiences within a level itself, on paper that sounds like it just shouldn't work, and yet Invisible Ink I think does it really well. The algorithm that they use for their level generation still provides challenging playgrounds that allow players to experiment with each character's abilities and the stealth mechanics of the game and still make sense within the space. And this is kind of what I was alluding to before about the kind of abstract realization. It allows them to mask and get away with a lot of stuff that if they were very focused on hyper realism, it would that would be a much harder thing to achieve. But because its conceit is it's in like a virtual reality almost, where it's these cyber noir hackers hacking into systems, and the player characters are like bots that you're using to hack systems and stuff, but all represented through characters. It all really works, and I really enjoyed playing that game.
Nice, man. No, I haven't had a chance to. Well, I never even heard of it actually, so I'd be one to check out for sure. I think for me, the next example is it just called Rogue? Why have I forgotten the name? Where you play as it's a 2D one where you're a knight, and you just go. PlayStation released it on there for free, one of their for free games. If you know which one I'm talking about.
Are you talking about Rogue
That's
Legacy?
The one, Rogue Legacy.
Okay.
Sorry everyone for forgetting the name then. That was a real bad move to say that. I've actually got it written here on a note as well. How did I not see that? But again, Stu showing me up. But no, Rogue Legacy, I think for me that was brilliant just because of also the style of game. I mean, it's the same as Spelunky in that sort of sense. But I liked how your character when you select different lineage, some of the traits they had could maybe change the way that you viewed an encounter in the level, or the level itself, and how you moved through it. Some characters were faster than others. Certain characters could throw certain things which could attack enemies in the distance. So I thought that was a really, I was rubbish at it. I sucked so bad. There must have been 150 people lineage dead, and I never got past the first stage. So yeah, don't come knocking on my door to save the world, people. I really enjoyed that one. I think it definitely it learned a lot from Spelunky. But yeah, that was one that I enjoyed from it.
Yeah, I remember that game as well, being brutally hard, but a lot of fun as well.
I think you did a lot better than I did, for sure. But yeah, so many people dead, so many victims. But yeah, well, I think, Stu, we're going to wrap it up there because it's been a fun one and a lot longer than I thought it was going to last. So that's even better, and I hope our listeners did enjoy this as well. So I just want to say thank you again for coming on the show and just chatting about procedural level design, because, you know, for us, we want to tell others about different methods, that there is different ways to do it, and, you know, why you should check these out. This isn't about which method's better. It's about showing that there is different ways to do it, and depending on your game, some might benefit, and one method might benefit your game over another, you know?
Okay.
So I was wondering, I was like,
He's just summing it up there. Yeah.
I just need you just to say yes occasionally, Stu, to make sure I'm on the right track.
Is this thing still on? Yeah, okay.
But again, thank you for joining me, Stu. Do you want to let people know where they can reach you and check you out?
Yeah, it's thanks for having me on, Max. It's been a lot of fun. If people want to hit me up on Twitter, I'm at creative_XP. And you can also see me on my website, where I used to write blog posts on Gamer Sutra and stuff as well. But my portfolio and everything is on creativexp.co.uk.
Cool, man. I will put links to that in the description down below, so you can go just click them and follow the links to check them out. I believe Stu will probably be joining me for a couple of episodes in the future if he wants to, but I've already spoke to his fiance. She's given the thumbs up, so that's the main thing. But if you want to show your support to Level Design Lobby, then please do subscribe and share it out to the people. If you want to leave any comments or feedback, you can either do that to Twitter through me at MaxPairs, or email it into me, which is leveldesignlobby@gmail.com. And yeah, just thank you for tuning in. It's been a fun one for us, and hopefully you've enjoyed it, everyone. So really just got to say is goodbye and thank you very much.